Today I'll show you how to get positional advantages, what a positional advantage is, and how to best utilize the positional advantage when you get it. So let's start with a few of my games that I've handpicked to show you exactly what a positional advantage is and how to best use it if you can get it. This is my game against Larry Remlinger from the New York Open 1985, where I tied for first. And I had white in this game. Played d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3. My opponent at this point chooses the Bogo Indian defense, starting with bishop b4 check. It's quite a versatile opening, but there are many positional pitfalls in it for both sides, and it's very important to know exactly what you're doing. So let's see how the game continued. I played bishop d2. Another move, another line is knight bd2, trying to preserve the bishop. Bishop d2 is the line that I prefer myself, and I think I only played knight bd2 once against a strong player, Vladimir Hort, who was one of the candidates for World Championship, but I didn't get much advantage in the game that in a draw. Black plays queen e7, and I play g3. Now this is this is a common developing scheme. The bishop from g2 will control the diagonal, the long diagonal, and will exert pressure on black's position. Black's main problem in this opening is, as in many openings for black, the bishop on c8. How to develop the bishop. So if white's bishop is on g2, waiting for his colleague to come to b7, it may not be that easy for black to develop the bishop, and then he has to find some other means of developing the bishop elsewhere, and that may create an advantage for white. And so that's basically what the main theme of this opening could be. So I played g3, and my opponent castled. Now this is definitely one move, although another very common move in this position is to play knight c6. The idea being that if white plays bishop g2, which is quite common, black has the opportune moment to take on d2 with the bishop, and it's very difficult for white now to make the best move, the best position placement for the pieces, which would be queen takes d2 followed by knight c3, because black at this point has a tactical resource. He plays knight e4 check, and after queen b4, queen c2, queen b4 check. And the problem is now that either white has to lose his castling rights with king f1, or play a move like knight c3 followed by queen takes c3, or play knight d2, which actually loses a pawn. Knight takes d2, queen takes d2, queen c4. And even though black's queen is not really that well placed on c4, I think white does not quite have enough compensation for the pawn in this position. So probably at this point the best is to play knight c3, knight takes c3, queen takes c3. But again, after queen takes c3, pawn takes, black has a nice position because he's managed to exchange off some pieces, and the double pawns on the c file will give black enough counter chances for easy equality. So because of that, in this position white has to take with a knight, and then black proceeds similar to the game as we'll see, but with the knight misplaced a little bit on d2 rather than on c3. I mean that's quite a big difference, and we'll see how in the game I use it when black neglects to play knight c6. I would say the most exact move order in this position. So instead black castles, I played bishop g2, and now bishop takes d2. Of course, I respond with queen takes d2, because knight e4 is no longer a problem. I can simply play queen c2, and on queen b4, knight d2, knight takes d2, knight takes d2, and all my pieces and pawns are intact. So because of that, in this position, black simply takes and plays d6. Now, again, I think what happened here is black mixes up plans. He thinks it's very easy to play this position, but this is exactly what I mentioned before, that this position is full of positional tricks, and this opening is full of positional tricks and surprises. And probably in this position, it was best to opt for this system, the d5 system for black, which aims to basically play a sort of queen's gambit decline position without the dark squared bishops. And black has had good equalizing possibilities in this line, although of course white always retains a little bit of a pull. So anyway, black played d6, and from now on I think it becomes clear that white has an advantage. Knight c3, e5, this is the common theme for black, and castles. Now it's possible that black would like to play e4 to kick the knight from f3, but the problem with that move is that after knight g3 the e pawn is hanging, and after bishop f5 white simply plays queen f4 with a double attack, winning the e pawn. So because that's not possible, black has to play differently, and black simply plays with an idea that he'll place his knight on a6 and will have a fine position. But we'll see that actually not everything is that easy for black in this position. So after a5, e4, black plays c6, and the last thing that remains to be done for white in terms of prophylactics is h3. Now the bishop can't come to g4 and can't exchange itself off, so black will be stuck with this bishop on c8. That, as I mentioned before, is the main positional question for black, where to develop this bishop in this opening. And so black has to become very passive. Let's see how he places his pieces and what the plans become for both sides. So black plays rook e8, I play rook a d1, knight a6, rook f e1, and black decides to wait with rook b8, perhaps at some point thinking about playing b5. But if you look closely, you'll see that white with the two rooks on e and d file actually controls the center much better than black, and we'll have some interesting ideas going forward in terms of opening up the position. The a5 pawn, for example, has become a weakness, and it's possible at some point to attack it, creating some sort of a positional threat. Anytime that black becomes active, it's quite possible that white will simply liquidate the center and come in with the queen, for example, after pawn takes pawn and queen d6. So all these possibilities white has, and black has to be very careful. But meanwhile, I continue simply improving my position. I play b3, covering this pawn just in case, and waiting for black to figure out what move he would make. So he plays bishop d7, and this creates an opportune moment for me to start attacking black's position. I play knight a4, and obviously this move has the idea of simply provoking further weaknesses from black, but also there's a concrete threat of queen takes a5. For example, if now black plays b5, I simply go back with the knight to b2, and black plays b4. I can play simply c5, and if you look at this position closely, we'll see that black is in big trouble. I'm threatening pawn takes pawn, followed by pawn takes pawn. So pawn takes pawn, followed by pawn takes pawn. And if black plays e takes d4, I simply take on d6, and after queen d6, I can play, for example, e5, winning the piece. So if black plays takes on c5, I take on e5, and again the knight is attacked and the bishop is attacked as well, so white wins a piece. So in fact, after c5, it seems that black has to lose material. If black does not play b4, he can, for example, try c5, stopping my own c5, but then I can simply take on e5, and after pawn takes pawn, rook takes b5 to protect the a pawn, I play knight c4 with a double attack on 2 pawns. So you can see that black's attempts to get active in this position fail miserably because white is completely developed and ready for aggressive action. And this is the result of these 3 pawns and these 2 rooks standing tall, controlling the center. And white has abilities to take on e5 or to play c5 at any time, and he gets to choose when to do what. So it's very difficult for black to find the opportune moment when white can't do anything about black's counterplay. So in this position, black found the only move that doesn't lose material. In short order, he plays c5. But the move c5 creates a weakness on d5. And let's see how I can make use of that. So I take on e5, pawn takes pawn, and I play knight b6. Now, of course, it seems like I have a double threat, the bishop on d7 and the pawn on a5. But in fact, the pawn on a5 is somewhat poisoned, so it's not really what I was looking for. So black has some ability to hold on the position a little bit more. So let's see, bishop c6, and now, of course, queen takes a5 is simply very bad because of queen c7, which pins the knight to the queen and threatens knight d7, picking up an exchange most likely. So as I said before, that wasn't my idea. My idea was to centralize the knight and force black to make a decision how to take it. So after knight d5, black decides to finally solve his issue, his issue of the light squared bishop, which was a big problem for him. And he takes on d5 with the bishop. I, of course, capture back with the e pawn, opening up the e file and threatening the pawn on e5. And there is also possible threat of the pawn on a5 with the queen, but we'll see how that can be handled. So after e takes d5, black plays queen d6, and all of a sudden it's clear that after queen takes a5, knight b4, black actually gets full compensation for the pawn because the queen has a problem getting back to base. In fact, white may have serious problems in this position because the queen can't even escape through a3 because of knight c2. So that was probably black's plan, and he probably thought that, well, you see, I got rid of my bishop, my light squared bishop, which was a problem, and all my pawns are intact. Don't I have a fine position? Well, in fact, I think black's position is almost lost, if not lost already. The problem is that the positional trumps that white has gained are incredible. Not only does the pawn on e5 will need constant attention, the pawn on d5 is a protected passed pawn, which will always be a strength in any endgames. The bishop against knight advantage that white has in this position will also come into play, as we'll see. The bishop in all kinds of endings, especially combined with the passed pawn that I have on d5, will be a huge trump. And right now, the next step for white is to put all of black's pieces in a very passive position, and then slowly improve the position of his pieces until white is ready to strike. So let's see how this is done. Well, it's done by simply improving the position of your pieces and attacking a weakness, forcing all black's pieces to protect them. So let's see, rook e2, a very simple looking move, but the idea is to obviously double on the e file. So rook e2, black plays b6, so that he doesn't have to worry about the tactics connected with the capture of the pawn on a4. Rook e1, already attacking the pawn on e5. Knight d7, protecting the pawn. Queen c3, attacking the pawn once again. Black plays f6, a logical looking move. How can white improve his position further? Well, he has to energize the bishop on g2, so h4, planning to go bishop h3. Knight f8, bishop h3. King h8, trying to get out of possible bishop e6 check at some point. What does white do now? How does he improve? Well, I see that I have an f5 square. If my knight were there, wouldn't that be an improvement? Sure. So h5. Not only am I restricting the movements of black's knights, his kingside, but I'm also planning knight h4, f5. After this, black's pieces, especially look at these passive pieces like the knight on a6 and the knight on f8, will be clearly outweighed by whites. So after knight h5, black plays knight c7, and I play knight h4. Of course, once I play knight f5, it's quite possible that moves like d6 or f4 will come into play, and black will have to really figure out ways to avoid being attacked and killed immediately. So black decides to stop at least one idea that I have and plays g6, stopping the knight intrusion into f5, but that of course creates further weaknesses along the diagonal here. And after g6, oh, actually black could have played g6, but he didn't. He played another move, but after g6, probably the simplest is simply queen d3, attacking the pawn on g6, and then king g7, for example. White can immediately win a pawn with pawn takes pawn, and queen takes pawn. A temporary queen sack, knight g6, and knight f5 check, picking up the queen on d6 with an extra pawn, and all the advantages that I've described are still there. So the attempt to stop the knight from coming into f5 wouldn't actually work. So black decides to sidestep and the pin on the e-file and moves his rook away to d8. I play knight f5, and of course black has to play queen d7, the only move. So, of course, I could still improve the position of my pieces. I could still play, for example, king g2 or king h2, threatening to uncover the attack against the queen. But I decided that it's time to open up the game, and I played f4. White has very menacing threats. He wants to take on e5, and if black takes on f4, he can play rook e7. It's very clear that the position did not hold at all for black, that as soon as white got the static position where he could just improve the position of his pieces, the positional advantage translated into one side being able to improve the position of his pieces, while the other was not able to improve the position of his pieces. So white managed to get his two rooks into play, his knight into play, and his bishop into play. His queen has stepped up to c3 from c2, while black really did nothing. If you look at it, he simply moved his knight from a6 to c7, the other knight went from d7 to f8, and his queen went from b6 to d7. His king moved from g8 to h8. If you compare those moves that were played by both sides, it'll be absolutely clear what a positional advantage means. A positional advantage gives you the ability to improve your pieces while your opponent cannot. And that's a huge, huge advantage. Imagine this in an army situation, in a real war situation, where you can move your pieces around, improve them, and then strike while your opponent just sits and waits. So in this position, after f4, black decides to bite the bullet and plays g6. Now, of course, there are a lot of winning ways for white, possibilities for white. The simplest solution was probably pawn takes pawn, rook h2. Obviously, with the idea that if a black takes on f5, white wins the queen with bishop takes f5, but also preparing to launch an attack on the h file. And after rook h2, for example, knight h7, pawn takes pawn, pawn takes knight, pawn takes pawn, the threat is f7. Besides f7, of course, white threatens rook e7, and really there isn't much black can do in this position. It's pretty much resignable. And of course, this was the simplest way to continue in this position. But at this point, I think I relaxed somewhat. And thinking that almost anything wins, I played pawn takes pawn, and pawn takes on f6, threatening the same rook e7 and f7. But black has a resource, a defensive resource here, although it doesn't actually give black a good position. The position would still be lost, but he holds on for a while. He plays knight takes d5, threatening the queen and stopping my attempts to mate him on the spot. Pawn takes knight, and queen takes pawn. And now, of course, f7 would not be made because black would interpose with the queen on d4. So if we look at this position, the material is even, but of course the knight is still on f8 and it's not doing very well, and white can just go after the pawns that are hanging. So I play rook f2, threatening the pawn on f5, and forcing black to find some other counter chances. Black plays knight e6, and after rook f5, finally queen d4 check, queen takes d4, knight takes d4. There are some traps available, so I have to watch the f3 square. So I play rook f4. Black plays rook e8, eyeing the e2 square, rook takes rook, rook takes rook, and I simply play bishop f1. So although I misplayed the position quite a bit, failing to win on the spot, if you look at this position carefully, you'll see that white is completely winning here. The reason is that the bishop will still be stronger than the knight, because the knight is only strong now while it's being protected by the c-pawn, but there's really nothing to stop white from moving his pawns on the king side up the board and basically technically winning endgame here. So after bishop f1, black played h6 because he was afraid that I would do the same. And I simply moved up the king to f2. Black decides to play b5 to stop my bishop coming from c4. And I simply play a4, making sure that my bishop does get to this important square. After a4, pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. Black plays rook b8, trying to activate his rook. And I simply play bishop c4, showing that black will have to always wait on the 8th rank. And after rook f8, simply f7, king g7, rook g4 check. And of course, if black moves his king to h7 or h8, rook g8 will win, so he has to surrender the h pawn, king f6, rook g6 check, king e7, rook takes pawn, knight f5, rook c6 attacking yet another pawn, knight d6, and bishop d5. And here black decided to resign, because not only is he 2 pawns down, he is probably going to lose the c pawn and most likely the a pawn, while white can still protect the h pawn with his pawn on g3 if black decides to attack it. So although of course the game could have ended earlier had I seen this maneuver with rook h2 after pawn takes pawn, it doesn't really matter, because I never doubted that I have a winning position once I broke open black's fortress, or really a fortress made out of cards, because as you can see, the positional advantage that I got in this game, which was basically the ability to improve my pieces while black was not able to improve the position of his pieces, was extremely huge. And I can say that I probably convinced you when I mentioned that the advantage that I had in the position was most likely decisive. I probably convinced you that it was. So let's look at another game and see how other kinds of positional advantages can be gotten, improved, and converted into wins.
This is Grandmaster Damian Lemos here for onlinechesslessons.net. First of all, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to receive more free chess videos from us, you can just click the subscribe button below. I would also highly recommend signing up for my free mail course, the 10 Grandmaster Secrets to Dominate Chess. During this exclusive course from onlinechesslessons.net, I'll share with you my own Grandmaster shortcuts to effective attacking, defending, and growth hacks to improving your chess without complicated books or memorization. So sign up by clicking the sidebar on the right, and I know you won't be disappointed. Once more, this is Damian for onlinechesslessons.net, and I'll see you in my videos. Thank you.